in so I can kind of like focus on what's going on here. So a couple different counters in polygon. So you have loop. So this is going to loop the highlighted area, and you just click on either side, click and drag, and then you can highlight the start and end point of the loop. And then your focus is going to allow you to focus on different parts of the sample entirely. So it's not, I guess, limited just to being focused on the whole sample. You can kind of zoom in here and do kind of like micro loops. So there's a couple like concepts I wanted to like introduce with like sampling. If you guys are like familiar with it, then dope, you know. So sample and hold is like another big thing for like making really interesting kind of like pads, drones, all types of like sound designy kind of sounds. To your question, Broken, yes. So whenever you change the focus, your loop stays the same. All right, so having the focus like this allows me to focus on just a really, really small loop. So sample and hold is when you go and make a really, really tiny loop and hold that one sample. All right, so I'm going to turn on the looping engine here. All right, so once this sample triggers, it's going to trigger from right at the beginning of the focus. It's going to play through, and then right at this point, it's going to loop for this long. All right, so you can make a lot of really crazy sounds with that. So that's really cool. So you can do that with any sampler. And this is actually a cool technique you can do without any granular engine, because it actually works better with no granular engine. Because when you loop one sample, it's going to actually change pitch, kind of like an oscillator. So sample being the samples that were taken by the A to D conversion, that's kind of what it's talking about, those samples, not the sample as a whole. So when I play like that, now it just sounds like a straight up tone. So I can modulate all those things and kind of like hold it in different spots. I can modulate where the loop starts and the loop ends. So that gets pretty crazy. And polygon is actually semi-modular. So semi-modular means that I can route any modulator to any parameter, but I can only route it within its shell. And I definitely talk about that in the notes again. Just about, you know, the difference between fully modular samplers and semi-modular samplers. Because there's actually kind of a huge difference. Because like with Contact, that's a fully modular sampler. And you can go into Contact's interface and script a new UI and actually have Contact's engine handle samples in the way you script it. So you can actually script new functions for the engine potentially. That's pretty much the extent of Contact. That's why it's really sick, you know. And having it be focused on sampling only is kind of a beast, you know, because Reactor is a modular synth that can do anything. You can go and code Contact Yeah. So exactly, Mary. You just script it like computer code. I believe it's C plus. C plus plus. But yeah, it's like also DSP. So it's a combination of both of those things. But if you're just scripting a straight up UI, then that's just C plus plus. So if you wanted to build like a new engine, that takes some like A to D conversion calculation stuff, because that's pretty much the craziest shit about plugins, is the cleanliness of its code and how it filters that information to emulate real hardware or whatever. So that's one thing. So like, just to give you even like a background on where glitch machines came from, it's like Ivo Ivanov, who runs this company, used to work with Twisted Tools, and they all kind of like were doing well together, and then Ivo decided to start his own thing. And what they were doing was they were building only synths for Reactor at the time, and then they moved to build those things in Reactor and then port them out to this other program called Juice, and that's spelled Juce. And Juice is kind of like a compiler. It allows you to script things and then code them into programs and create like plugins for software and stuff, or full-on programs. So that's kind of like, if you wanted to start somewhere, you can start in Max for Live and then build out a bunch of stuff for Max for Live. I actually have a bunch of like sound morph plugins that are Max for Live only and standalone, like a Orc voice modulator, and then this other thing called Wave Warper, which is a really, really intense granular sampler. Okay, so talked about sample and hold here, and that's really cool. So again, you can modulate the start and end points to make it kind of like pitch up and down, use that tone that it generates as an oscillation for its engine without having granular mode on. So in Polygon, you can change it into granular mode by hitting grains. And then you have a couple more functions here, which is stretch length, and then there's time, and then feedback. Let me zoom out here. So, so like grain size, that's pretty much what this means. L, grain size. You also have a counter down here. That tells you your amount. That's kind of good to know. Does it for all the different parameters. So this multiplies the time with the stretch. So times 100 of the original time. Then each of the grains can be fed back onto themselves. So it makes the super resonant sound. So that sounds actually pretty good. But yeah, so grain size right here. So we kind of talked about what grains are last week, and it's really simple. It's just resynthesizing, the waveform itself. So it's creating new like grains or samples, and then this is telling those grains how big to be. 10 milliseconds each, or up to 120 milliseconds. So any more than that, it would just actually be playing through whatever transient or piece of the waveform is actually taking a snapshot of, and then creating that like information in the middle of each of those separated samples, pretty much. So normally that's the loudest transient because it is threshold based. So the loudest transient is usually the thing that's going to be looped when you're stretching out a sound with granular synthesis. So the loudest transient in here. So why am I saying that? That's why I'm choosing to use drums. This is why I like to use drums when making like really weird sounds with like granular synthesis. And I also use drums and Serum a lot for wavetables. Just because the transients are so rapid and random that you can make a lot of really, really cool sounds out of it. Because these transients actually, because they're so hot just like right when they hit, actually takes a bunch of like really defined snapshots around it. I can stretch out something that's more like a drone, but it's not going to be as interesting. That's good for like some type of tone in the background, or like maybe putting in like some type of Foley or something like that. So many ASD files. I don't like that it's not sorting it. Let's go for helicopter. Alright, so this is more noisy, so it's not going to really make that much of a sound. But yeah, you kind of see how this works. You know, it takes in the information here, stretches it out. It's really, really not much, you know, crazier than that in Polygon. So Polygon is, like I said, kind of basic with its sampler engine. So it does have like a really good granular engine here. Its biggest thing is that it can mount 4 samples at a time. And being able to mount 4 samples at a time means I can pretty much stack a lot of you know, really interesting kind of timbres together and really interesting samples together. And they have like a really crazy sample library that was all made like with this. So on top of that, you can stack a sub oscillator that's built into it. So kind of gets pretty interesting here. So let's kind of talk about the routing really quick, just so you can navigate through Polygon. So we talked last week in synthesis, or I guess this week, about like modulation stuff. So what is a first order modulator versus what is a second order modulator? So we have a couple envelopes. We have one master envelope and then one envelope built into each of the samplers. So attack and release here. That's sampler 1's amp. So there's an amp right here. So A for amp, P for pitch, or sorry, pan, tune for pitch. Yeah, that's one that actually always trips me up in this, and I end up panning stuff instead of tuning it. Yeah, so then there's a glide here. This is kind of like a little hidden function, but that means you can glide individual samplers separately and then fine tune. So it's pretty basic. And then the routing is even more basic. So this is just for the sampler, and this reverses the sample right here. So, whoops. It's actually, I guess, pre-routed to filter 1. So this would be a subtractive route. So just sampler into filter. So I can't route both at the same time. I can do that if I click this button. So filter 1 to filter 2 on, and that sends filter 1's output to filter 2. But I can't send the sampler to more than one place. So then M and S should be solo and mute. So that's just so you can like audition other things or audition the thing you're working on. Which means turn off all the other ones so you can hear this one better. Alright, and then there's another routing on each of the filters. So the routing as it is right now is 5 parallel oscillators, which means all the modules here, and then the sub oscillator, which also has the same switch routing. Only thing different here is I can pretty much key track this, so it's not actually being key tracked. So that's what they mean by chromatic. So when that's off, then it just plays one note. So that's cool if you're going to be making like a lot of impacts with this. So I use Polygon for a lot of effect sounds. Oh yeah, which answers your question, Stosu. Like, that's pretty much like the best use for this. But also you can make a lot of like kind of weird glitchy effects and like bass sounds out of it too. There's some like, you know, melodic kind of sounds you can make, but it is not polyphonic, which means it can only play one note at a time. It allows you to glide in between those notes, but it is not polyphonic. So it is a monophonic sampler, just like Simpler. So Simpler now has like built-in warping. So these are the same warping algorithms inside of each audio clip. So they sound pretty interesting. Like repitch is actually pretty cool when you do sample and hold because it's a little bit warmer. It's kind of like a tape thing. Beats is also kind of cool if you're going to be using like this as just drum hit, you know, and that's kind of like its function. Textured tones are also pretty cool, you know, so these are all like, you know, use to your discretion kind of thing. The only thing I say is a big drawback is you can't automate anything in here, and Complex and Complex Pro take up a lot of processing. So that is something to kind of like keep in mind with that, because you can use a lot of these. But texture actually sounds pretty good, but you do not get any control other than moving this around. Do not believe there's any automation for it. So you would have to live record this in if you wanted to record that movement. So that's kind of a huge drawback if you're actually trying to make something granular with that. So I wouldn't say that Simpler is a really good source for that. Granulator is definitely a better source for that. So I want to introduce both of these at the same time, just because this interface here is super basic and this one is universal. So you can use this plugin in any DAW, and that's kind of the point. They kind of do very similar things. Granulator is polyphonic, so you can make some really interesting like pads and other things with it. It also has an FM engine and a couple other things that make it pretty cool, like the scanning functions. That shit's sick. But yeah, Polygon is really cool because of this. So in the bottom right hand corner, it has a matrix where you can go route pretty much any of these extra modulators, because these are all second order modulators. So that means it has a lot. 12. And they all work pretty much the same. So I explain one, explain the rest of them. So the LFOs all work the same. So there's rate right here. This is a multiplier. So that multiplies that rate by the number. So 1 to 10, or divides it. So anything below 1 will be division. And then attack. So that allows you to kind of like create kind of like a tremolo, something like that. You can actually make something pretty expressive with that. Mainly because you can assign this LFO to anything here. So if you want to sync it, hit the S button and then retrigger, so that syncs up to the MIDI notes. So you want to have those both on, unless you want just free flowing, and then keep retrigger off. Then it should start from playback. That's usually how most of those things work. It's called it's called anchoring. Some things allow you to take that anchor off, like Serum, but most things don't. All right, so the envelope here actually can kind of like act like a LFO as well, because it has a loop function on the bottom here. So definitely want to kind of like get up on loops to like make really crazy shit, because this doesn't have to be anything like this. This can be like a resample or anything like that, and that's when you like get really crazy with polygon, is by dropping like big bass sounds in it, especially for drum and bass. Like if you want to make like really gnarly, like kind of like, I wouldn't even like compare it to somebody, but if I was to compare it to somebody, kind of like current value or MFGC, halogenic kind of shit, where it just like has a lot of like swing and also a lot of punch to it. So like using granular synthesis gives you a lot of really crazy like definition on repitching resamples and stuff, and it allows you to get like a new kind of like control over the sound that you didn't have before. And one of my initial inspirations for that definitely was Culprit, but it was also Billion, because I saw this one video of Billion a minute ago, years ago, and he just like, he had like some type of router or something, which is like a wood router, and then he put it up to a big, or not a big metal thing, it was actually small, and then he recorded that and like made like a zzz, 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 like kind of sound, and then he made that into like a huge respace in a sampler like right after that, and like put in sub and all this other shit, so he made it sound like a huge sound. And I was just like, oh shit, my mind was just exploded. So that kind of like opened my mind to a lot of stuff for like experimental Foley sound design. Culprit was definitely an influence on getting me into like narrow basses with FM synthesis, because he's just like an operator king and sampler king, him and Cohen Sound. Like the samplers are a huge part of narrow bass design. I'm pretty sure Nasty Nasty can also agree with that. He's also another king of the sampler narrow bass world. Alright, so I'm going to turn this on. So it comes muted by default, so you got to turn it off. That's a solo. I'm going to have to re-enable this. Okay. So it's in square mode right now. I'm going to put in sine. Dude, I bet. I'm sure he hasn't changed a lot of his style. What I'm actually like referring to in terms of where Culprit was when I saw a bunch of his masterclass videos was Nightmares in Reality. So Nightmares in Reality, that album really opened my mind to like some new sound design, and got super into Rezo after that, and then Asa Sorrow. I actually found Culprit through Sorrow, because Sarah used to be like one of my favorite producers of all time. It still is. I love Sarah. His new stuff is very grimy though. I really loved his like garagey shit. His burial fucking remake shit. Him and Asa were the king of that. Kings. Yeah, so that is actually a huge thing though, and I'm pretty sure he still does it because like if you even like check out some of like Curse's streams or Frequent or anybody like that, you'll see them doing kind of those same techniques after they go and like resample a crazy bass they synthesize. Yeah, there used to be like like if you go and find that actual masterclass I'm talking about from Culprit, it's so poorly done. It's done by like a hand camera in like a big auditorium, and they're just trying to like zoom in on this like projector of Ableton. It's good shit, but it definitely like I learned a fuck ton of shit from it because I was just like that into it that I was willing to like put up with its basicness. Yeah, it's really good though. It's definitely one of those recommended videos, I guess. If I can find that video. I'm sure it's up somewhere for free by now. Yeah, so I'm gonna actually load in a bass here. Because this is another way I make like a lot of, I guess, sound designy effect reeses for like the big build-ups and shit like that. Actually, it's all in here. Oops. I have some of those reeses from the stream. I think I might want to use one of those. Let's use that razor one. Alright, so this is a long one, and it's actually crunching it all down. It's nice. So this focus really comes in handy for this kind of shit, but I definitely should just bring it into my session here and just chop it out. I should be able to drag and drop too. But yeah. So this is not always like with polygon and shit. It just literally could be done with the regular samplers, and that's like another thing I want to get into. But that's gonna be like multi-samplers, like kind of like right after this. Okay. These are hard. So definitely take off warping before you go and do something like this, whatever DAW you're in, because you want to make sure that there's no effects done to the original waveform. So once you get it, you know, isolated where you want it, then you go and consolidate. So now it's its own isolated waveform in a new source file. So if you cut anything out of this, it's just referencing this original file. So this snippet won't make a new file here or wherever I decide to drop it on the audio track. Oof. Definitely thought I was able to do that, but it's fine. Hiya. Oh no, none of those are actually projects in my user library. These are literally just the samples on tracks. So whenever I just drag a track into here, it makes a new project. Yeah, so what I'm doing, I'm just like saving it just so I can go find my session really quick and then just grab that file out of there. There you go. Actually gonna turn this into granular. Alright, so I'm gonna run through filter 1 now, and I'm gonna assign a filter here. So we just got the basic filters. Alright, so this is actually a problem in most granular samplers, is the clicks and pops. So because it's actually adding processing and warping to the actual waveform, it's going to pretty much limit it from not being able to change the volume and like put that volume in there. The same problem exists in like the samplers into here. In Contact, it doesn't have that just because it has a more sophisticated engine. Sampler that has that, but that is actually not granular at all. So it doesn't have the engine. Alright, so I'm going to route my sub to filter 2 so I can run parallel. So I'm routing my oscillators to filter 1 and my sub to filter 2, and filter 2 has no filter on it. So these two run directly to the output, which is right here. Master gain is A, master tune, and then I believe this is master glide and release. So there's no master attack, it's just amplitude here. And then you have a little effects engine here, and it's just metalizer, stutter, and ring mod. So in order to get anything into these three knobs allow you to route it either in parallel, so you route them like this, so it's running parallel like this, or you can route them in series. So if I route it to the metalizer first, I can turn it on this, which allows me to go into the stutter, then I can go into the ring mod. Or I can, route this from the metalizer and then patch this in at the ring mod. Hell yeah, Johnny. Alright, so that's a pretty interesting sound. I'm actually going to keep that route there just for the ring mod, just because this is a perfect sine wave. So when would I use a filter here? So low pass filter, switch this to square. I can filter it down and make kind of a thicker sub. So like obviously you see how that can like work in your music like already. It's a really basic sound, but these overtones you can add into it are something that definitely should be looked into. so now let's get it modulated. So kind of talked about the engines here. Now let's talk about how we route stuff. Already talked about where the matrix is, bottom right hand corner. So notice there's also random buttons. So random configuration should randomize your routing here, and then random should randomize all of your patch settings. So that's kind of cool, you know, just being able to do that alone. If you guys hear like a lawnmower going on right now, it's because it's super hot, so I need my window open. Tried setting up kind of a noise gate on my rack patch for my vocal, but can only do so much. Alright, so I want to get actually module 2, or actually this one, because this is the drum. I want to get this to like move around with its grain size and stuff like that. So actually, I'm not going to have a loop. I'm just going to make it start from the beginning over here. Alright, so matrix, I'm going to route an envelope. So I'm going to patch envelope 1, 2, and this is where knowing what these parameters do like comes in handy. So if I want to patch it to grain size, let's hear what that sounds like. So before you make a patch decision, you should go and touch the knob, twist it, before you decide, oh, I want this knob to move. And then when you move it, when it sounds cool at certain positions, you should go and make mental notes. It sounds cool here, also sounds cool here. What if I go and modulate it up and down like this? And then you go into the matrix, and then you're able to utilize a certain range and know that that sounds cool there. So you want to make mental notes where good things are. Let's actually loop this. Wasn't, but now I am. Oh, my bad. It's probably because it's super quiet. Just like straight out the patch here. Let me get some glue going on. Let's turn that down. It's a little harsh. Alright, so all that sounds pretty crazy. Or what do you mean? Oh. Bro, you gotta mention what you're talking about. I don't know what you're thinking. You're like talking about something halfway through your train of thought. It's great. Alright, so let's get this modulated. Alright, so envelope 1. Let's go into sampler. So we have these settings here. So all the ones we've already talked about. So I want to get grain size to move around, and maybe grain feedback or stretch. So one of these guys has some good gold in it, and I kind of like the size, but also the sampler start and end. Like that actually sounds pretty dope as well. So let's start there, because if I focus on different sections, you know, and also like keep the loop somewhat small. So notice how this is pink now. So now this is being modulated by envelope 1. So I'm going to turn on the loop on envelope 1. Let's get some signal coming out of here. I'm actually going to change this back to low pass for now. Turn that down. Alright, so now I can assign the percentage at which I'm going to modulate this. So percentage, what's that mean when I'm talking about this? So percentage means in this that it is a percentage of where it is resting at. So this range in here is a percentage at which this will modulate. So even when you're highlighting on it, you can see the modulation set. So it actually sounds pretty cool when I do it on this as well. So I'm going to do that too. So envelope 1, and let's get these linked. So if I assign the same modulator to two sources, when I modulate that one modulator, it'll sound crazy on both samplers. So that's sampler 3. I kind of want to do loop start this time. Alright, so now this is kind of modulating this little loop here, and it's kind of like squiggling around. So I'm going to make this a little bit longer. Alright, so that sounds super sick. And that's just modulating this loop start. Not doing anything else yet. So when I focused on a smaller range, it modulated this sample and hold. So that's why I'm like making it a point to explain some of this stuff right before I go into it. So you kind of know where I'm at with some of these terms by now. So a smaller range equals smaller range of movement on the sample. So because it's really small already, it's going to go modulated in micro amounts below, you know, the actual tenths place into the hundredths place of modulation. This thing's a beast, you know, and you can just make really, really heavy basses with it. And just like the sub oscillator in here is just, that's what granulator is literally missing. So granulator is cool. It's very DOS though. And what I mean by that is it doesn't have a very pretty UI. And that goes for most Max things and Ableton things, because it's all kind of baked into this little line here. You know, so anybody not in Ableton, this is definitely one of those use Ableton for this kind of things, because it's actually unique to it. So we're gonna talk about that in a second here. So just want to kind of finish off with the modulation. So I'm looping this right now with an envelope. So this envelope combines both of these millisecond values. So that means 6 seconds or 7 total. And then you have an attack curve and a release curve. So the release curve is the curve at which decay descends down to 0. So I could turn it into decay mode, where release just acts as pretty much, you know, just like a stab envelope. When it's in loop mode, it really doesn't change that much, but it can sound pretty interesting if you're making like little stabby sounds with it. So the LFO, that's another really simple thing. So what's cool about this LFO is that in here you can change it to hopefully you can see that it's a little bit pixelated, but so this should be sample and hold right here. So there's a sample and hold waveform in the LFO, so that allows me to go and send kind of a randomized set of modulation to things, which is cool. So I'm going to send that modulation. I think that was LFO 5, yeah. I'm going to send that to here. Again, I'm going to do that to loop ends. I'm just going to, again, focus that modulation kind of at a small value. Just around there. Kind of like around the same spot as the original modulation. And then I'm actually going to modulate feedback and a little bit of stretch, not too much. Feedback though is going to have the most effect on the sound, I think, just because it's very like resonant and I can hear a lot of like transients in there, and those are going to add a little bit of like almost like a metalizer to the sound. So I'm going to add that in 3, and that's going to be grain feed right here, and then another one. Let's put that on stretch. So I have 2 modulators going. So that's 2 modulators with 5 destinations. Mostly just affecting the main sample that I'm focusing on, which is sampler 3, because that's the bass sound I put in there. Alright, so I was saying grain feedback is something I want to keep kind of high in modulation. So I'm going to actually focus that pretty high up here. And then I'm going to push the resting position. That's a good question. Okay. So what Broken was saying, what does sample and hold mean with an LFO? So sample and hold means literally what it's saying in sample world. It's holding a sample. So what this means in modulation world is that it's taking a random sample of this modulated noise. So there's a noise sampler in there, just actually kind of flowing, and it takes one random pitch out of that, seemingly. In a pure sample and hold module, that's what it should do. But mostly it just randomizes that step value. So, you know, you have a lot of sample and hold modules that allow it to kind of have a curve too. Now, you could think that's... No, I don't think it's that. No, yeah, we're kind of limited just to that in here. But if you're in VCV, you can definitely use sample and hold, and then send it through a filter, and then make it smooth out. Or you can use any of the modulation and max if you want to kind of get a visual representation of what's going on in that. Max for audio. Max for audio. Go LFO. Alright, so bin should be kind of this. Yes. So every retrigger in Polygon, it should technically change the kind of like starting position. So it should be somewhat random. But when you modulate like grain size or, you know, loop size, that's when you get those really, really techy kind of sounds. So this would be a little bit more closer to what that sample and hold means here, because there's like random step values, and then you know, you can add jitter on top of that, smooth out the curves. So this is actually a really cool one. So that's really cool to run into granulator. So that's another thing with granulator you can do, you know, because you are limited on modulation, but you're not limited with max. So granulator is based in max. So if you're using granulator, you should already be kind of jumping into some max stuff, you know. And like max is really sick and worth looking into for anybody, just because, you know, max is pretty much maximizing everything in your computer to make some type of process happen. So it's kind of like a kernel for like an operating system almost. And you can even just like, you know, make full-on DAWs in it, kind of like Ableton here. Like Ableton is almost 100% max for live. Like every audio clip this is all max. So like that's the extent at which you can kind of mess with you know, modular stuff, especially in Ableton, just for sound design only. This is what really drew me to Ableton, because I've used pretty much every DAW. I really like FL. I don't like FL's window layout. I think that's super clunky, but I think it's a really, really high quality DAW, and the plugins are super sick. But Ableton is just open, you know, allows you to kind of like experiment with a bunch of stuff behind the hood that allows you to take basic stuff and make it really complex. It's kind of easy. And it's just literally set up to do that, especially with the drum racks and stuff. And I'm about to like talk about that in a second here. So it's just like listen to the sound. I'm going to route this through the metalizer. So what metalizer does is literally just a micro delay, feedback, time. So same exact thing as like say like a delay in here would be. So I did kind of mention some stuff about grain delay in that outline. And that's something definitely worth looking into. For specifically things like this, you can make really, really cool sounds with grain delays. Like a lot of, you know, G. Jones kind of shit sounds like grain delay. And I'm pretty sure I've heard him talking about it a few times, that he overuses it. And like a lot of people just use it a lot. I use it for a lot of like metalizing stuff too, just because it sounds really good and you have a lot of functionality with it. But it is granular. So alright, so kind of like into this. Alright, so now I want to make this into like a little bit of a stab bass. So I'm going to route envelope 1 into, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this out here and I'm going to open up this route. So I'm just going to route it only into filter 2, into the output through that. So take off this button so it unpatches it from the output, only runs filter 1 through here. So I want to make everything stab together. So I'm actually going to take envelope 2 because I'm already using envelope 1 up here. And then filter 2 cutoff. Alright, so now envelope 2 needs to be isolated. Alright, so it's opening all the way up right now. Kind of want to bring that down. Alright, pretty cool. Want to get a little bit more definition in these sounds, just so they pop through. Sounds pretty dope. All right, so I'm gonna keep it from the output, but I don't think it has enough like definition to high end still. So I'm actually gonna patch it to the metalizer just like this, and then I'm gonna keep these off for now. Stutter is literally just like a beat repeat, and so you can modulate the size of that beat repeat, and then the amount of repeats right here, and the ratio of size. So that's another stretcher. And ring mod is exactly what it says it is, a ring mod. So it's a fixed frequency modulator, only a sine wave, FM frequency, and ring mod frequency, FM depth. So it does kind of combine the two. So ring mod, what's that? It's amplitude modulation. It modulates the amplitude of an output. So you take an oscillator and modulate the amplitude of an output. That's what ring modulation is. Alright, so not really doing that much still. I'm just like modulating sample start, filter cutoff, stretch, just really basic things I was just messing around with. Moving the knobs, seeing what sounds good, and then putting modulation to emulate the way you just move that knob. That should be how you think about setting up a patch in any synth, sampler, anything. Okay. So before I get deeper into that patch and get sucked in more, let's move on. So I talked about a lot of stuff with granular already. So that means I don't need to go too much deeper into it. So I got polygon samples here. And I'm going to keep on explaining what this means. But yeah, we're not gonna go too much deeper on that kind of theory. I'm actually gonna just drop this whole sample in, because this is what granulator is actually really good for. So Alright, so everything I just did was random. There was no method to that. Really, it was just showcasing the kind of craziness of the original audio. So that's really what you should be worried about when kind of like dropping in something, is like, what's the source material? What kind of harmonics can I get out of it? Because everything I just did, so I was talking about scanning. So when I do this, you see that knob move. File position. So there is one input modulator for that. And that's LFO. To turn on a module, you just click that guy. Scan also kind of does the same thing. So how much time it moves and the distance. So pull this knob down, it takes less time to get the distance you set it. The curve, how it travels to that destination. LFO, really simple. Again though, you have randomize, sample and hold, and bin. So bin, again, is just like a gate signal or an on and off. Could be similar to sample and hold if you had some type of filter. So bin in modular world would be kind of like a Geiger counter. Yeah, Granulator 2 is a pretty old plug. I think I'll just link it up on the Discord, just in case anybody doesn't have it. But you should be able to get it for free. Is it free? I actually don't know about that. I haven't checked in a while. I got it a long time ago. So yeah, so having sample and hold here is actually cool because, again, I was moving this randomly. So if I'm able to put sample and hold onto this knob, then that's cool. Also, it has key tracking. So now when I play the notes on my keyboard, it will change the sample position based off of my key. Alright, so all I was doing there was holding down one note, added randomize to that file position. Again, same exact thought of move the thing that sounds cool, modulate that thing. And that's really the workflow you should be capitalizing on. Alright, so grain size now. How this thing is spitting out grains, you know, really determines the way it sounds. So, grain size. What does this mean when I'm talking about hertz? Because this is not going to be the only place that you see it in granular like terms. Like, because there's a bunch of other granular synths that refer to things in milliseconds, which is intuitive, logical. But grain, you know, it is logical when they refer to it in hertz like this, because what this is saying is it's getting faster. The readout's getting faster. So 150 hertz, 150 samples per second, similar to the way sample rate is being read. So that's kind of like their thought with it. So 0.25, you see this open up here. So the grain size is bigger. So what is grain here? It's literally just a catch for the sample itself. So you can say that this is a granular sampler. What it does though that makes it really granular is right here. So the spike. So grains have this as its size, and then so if the size is just open and closed, can you change how it opens and closes? Kind of like what I was saying with bin, where if I had a filter to take this on and off signal, I can tell, you know, whatever's turning on and off, how to turn it on and off, how fast it should go from 0 to 1, and what kind of curve it should take. So that's all right here. So standard spike is going to pinch that. So what this means at 0 is crossfade. Roll all the volume off at the beginning and end of the sample. Exactly. So it's binary. So, you know, those things are like kind of intuitive. You know, I don't want to go too deep into like coding language because, you know, that just takes people out of a creative mindset. But this is not the creative mindset, you know, time. This is the learning time. You know, you learn now so you can be creative later. And that's why you learn shit. All right, so you have a couple different sizes, shapes. So you can add noise to it. And this is really cool. So again, with that on and off signal, now I can actually trim that or just make it all on. Alright, so the noise can be turned into bin if you want to. You just use the shape, and that trims this bandpass that apparently it's putting on all these little tiny peaks it has in there. So that trims that back. You got fall, does the same kind of thing. This is like a stab. But again, this is not changing like an envelope onto a filter. This is changing each grain being created. So that is a volume curve on each grain. So standard is good. It's why we have crossfades, because zero crossings create peaks and clip information, digital clipping. So that can be cool sometimes though. Say if I was playing a lower pitch, so now when I trim this spike all the way back, it's almost like it's pulse width modulation. So we're going to talk about pulse width modulation kind of next week, because we're going to be talking about oscillators and really getting deep into like real synthesis engines now. Now that we talked about history, set the playing field for the vibe of like, hey dude, we're going to be making original shit here. You know, that's the vibe, you know. That's pretty much where we're going to be going, because that's kind of like, that's just what I do. So, you know, it's pretty easy stuff to like take in once you have all the information and foundation to kind of like platform that on. So again, what is this doing? This is spraying that start point. This is scanning that start point, changing the distance. How much time to get to that position. And then what shape each grain should be. All right, and then you also have a live incoming grabber. So you can, if you've seen Granulator, it has this extra little buddy guy in there with them that is just like not being used. What's that for? And that is for live input. So Granulator input right here, you can go and just put this on top of a track, any track with any type of input, and then hit grab, and it will sample from that input and put it in here so you can go play it back. And that's really dope. But that actually works exactly like the NN19 or the NNXT in Reason. So that's something in Reason. Reason is really, really powerful. Like I was talking about Neuro stuff, like Cohen Sound, Culprit. Cohen Sound like started completely in Reason. And they were making all their Neuro bases with like Maelstrom, like resampling those into NN19s and stuff. And for you guys that are super into like hip hop stuff, it's all about, you know, that kind of stuff when you're making really weird kind of impact sounds and like kind of transient sounds, like if you're into Dr. Dirk. That was kind of like his thing. He was super into Reason. Okay, so this is a really crazy one. So definitely look into it. I'm just going to touch on these second page things here. So amp envelope, this is where you're going to find it. You got to click on this little button. It's kind of hidden. So remember there's a button here. So we got zoom, or sorry, grain, just reading that. And then we got amp envelope right here. So that'll be your defining thing, like where's that page? So that needs to be visible. So again, turn on the modules in order to get them to work. If I want to get FM into the sound. All right, so now I can keyboard track. So this is one of my favorite things in Granulator. It's an extreme thing. It's not a very light sound. So definitely have key tracking on. Key amount, that should kind of like be adding the same scale to it. Then this is FM amount, and you can add envelope onto that and velocity scaling. All right, so that's kind of it for Granulator. You know, I shouldn't have to explain. Got a basic EQ, bandpass, you know, envelope modulation, then finally our voice engine. Really, really basic voice engine, you know, just as a little drop-down menu, and velocity modulation for the master, and that should be visible on both menus. All right, so you know, definitely this is going to be like really beneficial shit for you to kind of like crack into. Definitely get Granulator and Polygon. The Polygon samples are also really, really amazing. And I definitely linked some of that shit. So definitely grab it from that little list I gave you in the text doc. I'm just going to do that so I don't have to like, you know, limit the amount of stuff I can give you guys. I can just like link you guys a few little things every now and then. All right, so then kind of like switching gears into multi-samplers and stuff, just to kind of like get into what like this all means. So, you know, this is 101. So I don't want to go too deep into this. So I defined a lot of stuff into this. That should kind of get you started and where to start looking for some of these things, because I'm going to point these out really clearly right now. And this should literally only take like 10 minutes, you know, because these functions are really basic. It's just knowing that they're there and knowing that you have to manipulate them to actually make it sound good is kind of like a thing that you wouldn't really know off the top of the hand. Okay, so let's go into sampler. All right, so sampler is something I use a ton, and that's because it's really consistent and it's clean. It also has an FM oscillator, just like Granulator. So there's a few different menus here. See, I'm not going to talk about all these menus. I'm just really going to be using this. So what is this? So it says zone right here. So right over here, I'm talking about root note and zone. So what that means is the original pitch of the sample in sampler. So if I drop a sample into this sampler here, and let's actually do that. So let's just keep this one because it's right here. So root note is set to C3. And this is actually a really good tool to teach this, because this is general knowledge. You're going to have a root note in every single sampler you get into, and if you want to really understand contact at some point, it's going to be crucial that you know that. So that all means that here. So you can do minor detuning. Scale. Whenever you see scale, that means that this is going to be following a key scale. So it even says it right here. All right, so snap. This means snap to zero crossing. So zero crossing, we talked about that I think in the last class about like bit depth and all that. So unipolar, well, I guess modulation as well. So we've talked about zero crossings in a couple places already. So where the sample crosses this middle line is 0, and then this is a waveform modulating. So all these little waveforms on top of this big waveform are overtones, and this is the main audible waveform. So the main audible waveform is what we're worried about. We want the main audible one to cross 0 perfectly. And so that's what that does. So why is that important? Because it's literally telling this start flag to snap to the 0 crossing, so you don't start on a bad point. So you can see it snap all over the place here. pretty much it'll create a click and pop. That's something you don't really want. So you want to have snap to zero crossing on. But you don't always have to. You can have it off, and then you can use attack. So again, just like what we were just using in granulator with that grain readout, crossfade is going to actually smooth out anything that is clicky and poppy. So sometimes in Serum you can't get rid of it because you are compressing it so much that the OTT is bringing out a click and pop that is not removable. Alright, so all the same stuff in here as we've seen in all these other samplers, which is loop start, loop end, crossfade. So I was talking about sampler having crossfade here, and that's when you turn on sustain mode. Sustain mode means loop. So I'm not going to be doing that for this huge sampler here yet. Release mode. So release mode, that's something cool to introduce here because this is a very common thing in Kontakt. So release mode has another loop. So when you turn on one loop, you can have another loop stacked. And so once this first loop finishes, meaning the sustain is over, meaning you let go of the key, then it goes into this loop, which is the release loop. It's really good for samples because it can sound kind of awkward. Alright, so then you got your final optimization things over here. So in interpolation, this is where I was talking about offload into RAM. Let me zoom out here. So offload to RAM here. So when a multi-sampler stores the currently active bank of samples into RAM to optimize the CPU for larger sessions or higher quality samples. So this affects how the waveform is going to be read out. So interpolation, we talked about aliasing, and with no interpolation, you're going to have aliasing. So that means you're going to hear a high resonant sound up in the high frequencies when you play it out. You know, just anytime you repitch the sample, you'll start to introduce that aliasing sound, which is, you know, it makes it sound like an MP3. So you kind of want to keep that on best if you're going to be doing like just one sample in here. Good best, usually it's good bet. But RAM will take this sample, like I just said, and offload it into RAM. If you have Kontakt has a memory server that allows you to offload gigabytes of samples into RAM. So you can run like huge sessions, and then Kontakt is just sourcing those samples from this little cache, which makes it really, really snappy. So that's kind of crucial with samplers here. So I wanted to introduce this zone up here and velocity sampling. So every multi-sampler has this, and it's called a zone, which means I can put in as many samples as I want to fit onto 127 keys. So I can stack them. So that means only 127 samples, but I can stack them with velocity on each. So this right here is going to be something you see in every multi-sampler. So I have range. So zone range. From what note to what note will this sample trigger? So in Polygon, I was saying it was a mono sampler, so you can only play one voice, but it also had 4 samplers in it. So technically, Polygon would be this, and that's all it had. But it's really powerful what it can do on those 4. So what this means is now I can trigger this sample at C2 and above, and this at C1 and below, or I can crossfade them. So that's a volume trim. Alright, so there's a ton of like stuff in this sampler that actually like makes it really powerful like that. The piano sampler that comes with Ableton is actually really, really good. So velocity modulation works the same way, except we don't have a key scale anymore. We now have just this red line that signifies velocity. So now this is where I can have the zones overlapping. So with two velocity layers, I want the zones to overlap because I want the same sample to possibly be triggered at every key, or just on that one key. But then I want it to switch to the sample, and I can even crossfade in between those zones here. So zones are consistent. When you see zones in new lights, they mean the exact same thing. So final zone is the selector. Now this has this little selector at the top that you can select between things. So this means that I can have a whole handful of samples in here. And then I can use this selector to kind of cycle through these different samples. And I can macro that. So Command G to group, map to macro. So I can use this knob to move around. And then finally, this is like really consistent again in all samplers. Distribute ranges equally. And you should be able to sometimes scan for root note. And so that's really crucial on doing like huge multi-samplers and stuff. If we're really gonna get into some serious, I guess, music production, besides just like, you know, airy ambient intros. If you want to do something a little bit more orchestral and kind of epic, and a lot of like drum and bass tracks kind of get to that level with their intros, where they're like super huge and epic, or they have like some type of concert drums going on, and a lot of that is part of this. So if you want to understand how to make that happen, so you know, if you even wanted to get into movies or even doing anything like that's higher level audio production, you have to understand this. Like if you don't, like, this is the baseline thing that a composer would actually know when it comes to synthesis. And every audio engineer, like higher end audio engineer I've worked with, does know that. And it's one of the reasons why I got my job initially, because they would know how to use a sampler, but then couldn't find where the amplitude knob was on like massive, you know. So it's just very, very much a, you know, disparity of things there. So being able to have all of it is really powerful, especially if you're a music producer at the core of you, not so much a sound designer. All right, so again, I don't want to go too deep on these menus, mainly because they're pretty self-explanatory. We just talked about all types of modulation, filter types, all that shit. You know, so, you know, this shouldn't be anything new to you. This explanation should be new if you don't know anything about multi-samplers, because typically when I use sampler, I don't use all this shit. When I load up a sampler, this is being used, but somebody had to design that, and that's kind of the main thing. So now to kind of switch gears, talk about some more zones. We got drum racks, and drum racks are really, really simple. But they're also awesome because they're modular. So this drum rack is fully modular, fully. And like, I don't say that lightly, because for me to say something's fully modular, it has to like meet all the modular standards, meaning it can patch in and out. I can do that right here. I can drop audio effects, patch in and out. I can send information into individual pre-patched things in Ableton, which means to every compressor from directly from one pad. So that makes drum racks super powerful. So that means I can do any type of drum processing in here. I can drop any synth on this pad I want, and any effect from my plugins or whatever. So when we get into drum synthesis, it's going to be easier just to use a drum rack to go and trigger it, because then we can tell the drum rack a couple things in order to get to play. And let's just kind of drop a couple samples in here. Actually, I'm gonna do hats just because I kind of want to talk about something. All right, so saw me do that as well. That's another thing drum rack can do. I can grab a handful of samples randomly, just drop them in there. It'll throw them out to the pads. If I wanted to combine a pad, say I wanted this hat, and I wanted to combine it with this one, I can hold down Command and drop it, and it creates an instrument rack. What's cool about the instrument racks is it has the full zone capabilities of a multi-sampler. So then I can trigger synths as if they were a multi-sampler. And that's one big thing about Ableton is it exists in both audio effects racks and instrument racks and drum racks. The reason why they're called racks is because they're modular. So this is a huge thing in Ableton people kind of overlook and maybe use, but yeah, for the most part, like nobody really thinks about how crazy huge this thing actually is. They kind of underestimate it because it's so barren. There's nothing in here. You just drag a bunch of shit in, whatever, and you're just playing drums with it. So you don't really think too much about that. When you think about a crazy drum synth, you think about something like Battery or Kick 2 or something. But yeah, so couple really key things to know, and this is again universal for all synths that handle drums. So receive note and a play note. So receive note is the pad. So you see the note on the pad. This sampler is going to receive C1, and it says it right here. Whenever I move that pad, it changes that receive note. But the play note does not change. So the play note is the note that the pad plays. So this allows me to actually use this pad to design a drum, but then use it to pitch it. So I can design a drum in perfect pitch, always, using the play note, like this. Alright, so that's really good. Definitely, again, overlooked. And then right here, choke group. So this is something that is really crucial to know if you want to make an actual playable kit on a drum rack in general, is what a choke group does and why to use it. Alright, so say this is my closed hat and this is my open hat. So I want them to respond to each other. So I will highlight both of them and put them in choke group 1. So that means that these two pads, when one triggers, the other one will stop its audio output. It won't stop the triggering, it will stop the audio output. So it's as if a hi-hat has closed and you trigger that sample. So when you close a hi-hat, it makes a noise of a hi-hat closing. And so that's the sound you want to actually mute that other sound. So let's hear that. All right, so effectively, this makes these two pads monophonic to each other, but I can still trigger that sample and this sample at the same time. So that means I can utilize 16 different choke groups inside of every drum rack. But then instrument racks are modular too. So I can drop this drum rack into a string of drum racks and make as many things as I want, literally until my computer breaks. So yeah, it's pretty cool. You can have effect returns here. So create return chain. This is another hidden function. So right click, create return chain, audio 2. I can patch this out of the drum rack now. So most people don't know how to do this because they think they got to patch out of here. But you can actually use racks to modularly patch in and out of tracks in Ableton at any point in another track in Ableton. Any point that you go and set an input, say on a side chain, and then audition that side chain, you can go and patch audio in crazy parts of each chain. I've done that for like some crazy respaces before just to put that theory to the test, and it worked. But yeah, so that's something to keep in mind when working in Rex. Say in Ableton, you have fully modular stuff to work with. But in other DAWs, you're kind of limited, but you do still have like really good stuff. It's like Battery 4. Like Battery 4, just to kind of like finish off the sampler kind of like dive today. So it has everything that you would pretty much need. So it has a sample editor. It has velocity editor. And this right here. This is what makes Battery worth it. Right here. Because this is a MIDI filter. So I can put in articulations that tell my drum how to play in certain different types of programmed drummer type strokes. So flams, rolls, 3-stroke rough. So that's the kind of shit that you want to be able to utilize, but you have to understand where it is. So Contact also has this engine. So this is semi-modular because I can put in any sample, and also switch out the parts, move around some of the parts too. So it has glue compression, saturation, transient designing, and it has those at multiple stages. Yeah, so seriously, like if you're trying to make like concert kind of drums and shit and actually make like a bass drum sound like a player is playing it, you kind of need to like really know drumming, you know, like really know how to like manipulate MIDI. So this kind of takes that step out and allows you just to use your articulation. So again, MIDI filter, so it takes in incoming MIDI, and let's actually hear this. Okay, I'm gonna go do this. So I can change the dynamic kind of like movement of that MIDI, or change the speed. Alright, so you hear how that sounds? It sounds really good, you know, just coming from MIDI. So that's really cool. The speed roll, kind of the same idea. So it's almost impossible to do a snare roll. And I've tried, you know, because like I've had to do like orchestral kind of stuff before, and it's just like really hard to go and write all that shit in with MIDI. So this really helps a lot. So now that's spitting out MIDI so fast that it sounds granular. And that's for like a build-up, you know, kind of section or anything like that. All right, so that's a lot of stuff. And, you know, I definitely kind of like underestimate how much time this would take to like explain granular synthesis and like really go in depth on it for you guys. But, you know, I don't think it's not worth it. And I think if you're confused at all, you can definitely hit me up, and also watch the video again, kind of brush through stuff, check the notes. So just to kind of like end stuff off here, because this was kind of the point of me talking about this in the beginning, because this stuff is all hypothetical. How do you choose sounds? How do you do what? You know, I could tell you, you know, a million different ways of how to go and choose a sample. But really it's going to come down to you developing your own taste. And that's really the big thing, is you gotta like Again, double down on yourself, know the genre that you're shooting for. And, you know, it's like, I may talk shit about people being kind of like inauthentic. But it's because, you know, the general idea of things is kind of being lost amongst all of this. You know, because being an opportunist kind of gets in the way of you choosing something that is truly your decision. You know? So that's why you got to make it a point to really, really go in on that. So when using stuff like sampled audio, it's important to like keep in mind this stuff. Emotional response, something that you identify with. You know, because if I'm going to go dig on a sample right now, like, and I'm going to do this actually because I'm just going to like make a little beat out of a sample I did. That's my YouTube bookmark. Just because like when I get up in the morning, I just click it on and I just get my shit going. All right, let's do. All right, this is one of my favorite samples. All right, you guys might lose me for a second while I record a little bit of this. I'm just gonna patch it directly in. Well, actually, I should be able to get it. I just can't talk. A little background. My grandma was super into this guy. My homie Aztec also very into this guy. Like we actually bonded on that a lot. That's mi familia. Alright. I'm already inspired. Alright, so that's half of my sample process. Is like, you know, just like listen to it. I think I recorded myself at the beginning there. And then just like let it hit you at some point. You know, let it give you an emotional response. And when you're listening to the world around you, you should be looking for that in everything. And that's why people that are into sampling get like very into it, because it is kind of a way of life, you know? It's the way you look at the world now. All right, so part of your homework is to make a drum rack. But if you're not in Ableton, I know some of you are not in Ableton, try to find some type of drum sampler and make some patches in it, or organize your libraries so you know your samples are at the ready. You know, so you know where the good stuff is that you personally like. So when I set up a drum rack, it's always like that, and you know, I named them pretty randomly and unique just so I can find it really easy. So this is a conglomeration of a bunch of samples that I like, but it's mostly boom bap but there's a lot of big snares. And kicks. The kicks are really big in this one. So, you know, just set your vibe, you know. So when I'm gonna go like lo-fi, I go for boom bap XX, because that's lo-fi. I'm actually gonna go for lo-fi on this sample. All right, so you know, find a sample that you identify with, snip out a piece, record it to a point where you hear something that's really cool. Don't just, you know, I mean, you can just, you know, YouTube to MP3 it, but it's better if you just listen through it. If you listen through while printing, it's actually more productive, in my opinion, because you're going to have to do the same thing anyways. So, you know, I do that when I don't want to download a 35-minute mix. All right, so I'm actually gonna save as. I'm gonna get all this shit out of here. All right, so again, back to listening to the sample and kind of like finding where it can go. It's like, I like this little modulation right here. I like the little melody in it. So it's really simple. It's just, but I think that because I liked it, and when I heard it, I was like, yeah, you know, I'm just gonna use that, and that's like why I'm making that choice. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind, is self-awareness. You know, how are you going to be constantly responding to your own music? How do you not be bored with your own music? How do you keep yourself inspired while producing? You know, it's all part of like the big picture on like why we need to be good in our craft and not really be worried about how stuff works while I'm trying to be creative. You know, because if I'm like, say if like this was the case with painting, which is not, because it's a paintbrush and it's paint. There's zero you have to think about there. You can go and argue, you know, the ignorance kind of argument, I guess, with painting, but not so much with like a technical skill, you know, metal bending or say vector art. You're not going to be able to just pick up a brush and throw some paint at a wall. So you got to be kind of up to par with that. All right, so I'm starting on a couple things that I like. Again, things that I like. So I really like the sample, and I like